November election. Let's bring in Mark Dubowitz. He's Chief Executive of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Welcome, Mark. Good to see you again. So this response from Israel seems to have been effective in the sense that it hit the target, but it was also restrained. Why do you think the Israelis responded like this?
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me. I think the Israelis are trying to thread the needle. They obviously want to keep a close relationship with the United States. And, you know, President Biden had actually said don't to the Iranians, and the Iranians fired 320 missiles and drones at Israel. And then he said don't to the Israelis, and the Israelis had to obviously respond, and so there was a limited strike. I thought the strike, it showed some really impressive Israeli capabilities, was symbolically important, did some damage to Iranian assets. So I think the Israelis accomplished what they wanted militarily, symbolically, without getting into a political fight with the president.
Elaborate on that point about the symbolic importance here. I mean, what did it show? What kind of message did it send to Iran about Israeli capabilities?
So it's interesting because the Iranians had fired these 321 cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones at an Israeli air base. All of those were shot out of the sky, showing Israeli technological wizardry in partnership with the United States and other allies. Then no planes were damaged. The Israelis turned around, took a fighter jet from a long distance and shot a ballistic missile right through the air defenses of the Iranians. Those are S-300 Russian-purchased air defenses, supposedly the most sophisticated in the world, in the first battlefield operation that the Israeli Air Force has had against the S-300, and those struck an Iranian Air Force base. So the Israeli message is we can do a lot more with a lot less, and we can do it successfully, and you failed. And so I think that's a message to the Supreme Leader that his military assets, his leadership assets, and his nuclear assets could be held hostage.
Do you think that the Israelis would have responded with more missiles in response if the President of the United States hadn't been calling for them not to respond at all? Take the win, I think, was President Biden's quote. And of course, I think it was the Israeli defense minister who called it weak online. Would they have done more?
Yeah, they would have done more. I mean, the proposal to the War Cabinet consisted of many more targets. And I think, obviously, the most important thing here is that the regime in Iran, it may show a certain degree of weakness and fecklessness in terms of its actual capabilities, but it's on a pathway to build nuclear weapons, and it's a stone's throw from having nuclear weapons. So I think the Israelis have to understand, and I think they do understand, but I think they're trying to persuade President Biden of this, is they need to start going after the weapons scientists and the facilities that enable Iran's march to nuclear weapons.
And we'll get to the nuclear in a bit, but the big question about the strike and is whether or not it will actually deter Iran from attacking again, because it really did a week ago cross that red line, attacking Israel directly for the first time. And of course, it still has the ability to essentially order its proxies, particularly in Lebanon and Syria, to strike Israel. Is it enough, that response, to deter Iran?
Look, the Islamic Republic has been at war with the Jewish state for 45 years, so I'm not sure it's going to deter Iran. I think we're going to see multiple rounds. You know, this has been a war in the shadows, but it's also been the Islamic Republic using its proxies. This, as you said, is the first direct attack against the Jewish state. It won't deter Iran, but the Iranians downplayed this attack. It basically said nothing happened. There were a bunch of drones. They were like, quote, toys. There was no damage. And so they did everything possible to downplay this because they didn't want to respond. I think they were actually really surprised by Israeli capabilities, both on the defensive side in terms of the air defense systems and on the offensive side in terms of the strike through this S-300 right at an air base.
So regarding the nuclear program in Iran, they've been moving stealthily forward with it. You've documented this all along the way. What should President Biden do to change his policy to try to contain this? Because, of course, his desire to have negotiations has gone nowhere.
Well, President Trump President Trump adopted a policy of maximum pressure, which brought the Iranian economy to its knees. He killed Qasem Soleimani, the IRGC Quds Force battlefield commander. And then President Biden came into office and said, maximum pressure doesn't work. I'm going to adopt a policy of maximum diplomacy. It turned into maximum deference and maximum concessions, and most of Iran's nuclear escalation has occurred on President Biden's watch. So he needs to make it very clear, both rhetorically and in terms of U.S. military positioning, that he is prepared to take care of Iran's nuclear weapons capabilities. At the end of the day, Paul, the Iranians are on track right now to build an intercontinental ballistic missile, which will be nuclear tipped, that only has one address. That is the United States of America, and it's up to the United States, not a small country like Israel, to deal with this growing nuclear weapons threat.
But do you see any evidence that this is likely to happen from the Biden administration? Because the sanctions that they introduced against Iran this week after its attack on Israel seem to me to be mostly beside the point. They still don't get to the heart of the financing that Iran gets from selling oil, for example, most of it to China.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, those sanctions were performative, they were symbolic. The Biden administration has been not only unprepared to enforce sanctions, it's provided billions of dollars to the Iranians in terms of access to frozen oil funds. And the Iranians are exporting tens of billions of dollars, as you say, to the Chinese without any fear of punishment in terms of sanctions. So the Biden administration's got to get serious about sanctions. If they're not serious about sanctions, they're not serious about coercive diplomacy. And if they're not serious about that, they're not serious about stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program. So do I think the Biden administration is going to get serious, Paul? I don't. I actually don't. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, the Israelis are going to have to do what they've done at least twice before when they took out Saddam Hussein's Iraq nuclear weapons program and Bashar Assad in Syria. So unfortunately, we're subcontracting our national security to a small country of 10 million people to try and defend us.
All right.